Oh yeah.
These are South American fur seals with a turkey vulture in attendance, hoping to pick up a few scraps, a quick meal. Did anybody, a couple of lectures ago, I talked about a small bird called a steamer duck, and it rows itself across the water. As we came in on the tenders, did we see any?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so you've all ticked off flightless steamer duck now. You're doing well. And do we see this?
Yes.
Very nice bird, yes? Yeah, king penguin. My favourite, actually. Not the biggest penguin. Emperor penguin is the biggest penguin, but certainly it's my favourite. It is penguins we are going to talk about today. I appreciate we have spent time, sometimes not always easy with the scheduler to get everything in the order that it needs to be, but this is as good as it gets because we have all seen all the species of penguin that we are likely to see. And I appreciate that so many in the audience, penguins are penguin. But there are many, many different species. You will all have photographs. We are going to go through the majority of the species now. We're going to talk about how we separate one species from another. And a little later on, we'll talk about some of the, as ever, the biological and physiological adaptations that allow these birds to survive in some pretty hostile conditions. So, the first bird we are going to look at is this. Does anybody know what it is? This is a great auk. This became extinct in 1844, and this bird has never ever lived in the southern oceans. This has never lived in the Antarctic. This is a bird from the North Pole, from the Arctic, and this is a bird from a group of birds called the auks. And the sailors of the day in the Northern Hemisphere, when they arrived in Antarctica, when they arrived in South America, they came across these birds called penguins, and they reminded them very, very much of this bird, the great auk, which is also flightless. Now, the Latin name for the great auk is Pinguis impennis. Pinguis impennis. That's how the name penguin came about, from the Latin name of a North Pole species. The sailors thought penguin looked very much like this bird. Pinguinus impennis. So that's how this bird got its name. Out of interest, they are very, very different families. The auks and the penguins are not related whatsoever, and it's something called convergent evolution. And what that effectively means is it's two separate families of birds finding the same solution to the same environmental conditions. So basically they both became flightless, they both reduced their well, actually a lot of auks can still actually fly, but the wings are very, very reduced. Puffin is another example. If we're all familiar with puffin, they're an auk as well. They have very, very reduced wings because they spend most of the time either on or under the sea, very much like penguins. That's convergent evolution. Completely opposite end of the poles. Two families not related at all, finding the same solution to the same environmental problems. So, penguins. There are between 18 to 20 species of penguin worldwide. So why isn't it a little more definite than that? Why isn't it 18? Why isn't it 20? Because as usual, scientists, biologists, they never agree with each other. We always have to be the one that's right. And what we get is we get what we call splits. And what that is where we have one species that perhaps might become geographically isolated, and some scientists think, well, actually that one species has now become two. And it's adapted to the very specific environmental circumstances in which it lives. It might be on a very small island, and therefore we consider this bird a separate species. Then the geneticists get involved, and they take blood samples and they run a DNA sequence, and they say, well, actually, they're absolutely identical, so there's no way they can be two different species. So that's where we get the slight variation in whether it's 17 or 18 species. But we're going to go through 18 to 20 species, but we're going to go through most of them today. As I said, I was on Falklands yesterday. If anybody knows, I was looking for a very small penguin, an Australian fairy blue penguin, and I didn't see it. Devastating. And it's my birthday today too. Sorry. Anyway, I've got two more. Thank you. I've got two more bites of the cherry. You never know. Fingers crossed. So, our penguins down here in the southern hemisphere fall into four main groups. They're crested, as the name will describe. They have these crests. There's a crested there. That's a southern rockhopper penguin. We have the banded group. You saw banded yesterday, Magellanic. We have brush-tailed, as the name sounds. They have a very stiff tail that sticks out the back, and that aids in balance and movement. A lot of these birds go to great heights. Did we see when we were off Elephant Island the other day? Some of those penguins were really high up. They use their tail and they use their claws in order to make that scramble. So they're brush-tailed. And we have the great penguins, and they include king penguin and emperor penguin. Now within the crested group, we have rockhopper, and again, that's one of those splits I was talking about. We have northern rockhopper and we have southern rockhopper. Morphologically, they do look quite different, and we'll see some pictures in just a tick. In the banded group, we have Magellanic and Humboldt. I know many of you have been on since Los Angeles, and on the way down you would have seen a banded penguin, and that would have been a Humboldt penguin. The ones you've seen here down in Antarctica and Falkland, they would have been Magellanic penguin. If anyone's ever been to South Africa, Simonstown, Amanda, Simonstown, there's another banded penguin there, and that's called an African penguin, and they all look quite similar, but again, we'll go through them in just a tick.
Jackass.
And brush-tailed. These include Gentoo, Adelie, and Chinstrap. Gentoo, yes, we've seen all three of those species this trip. Did we all see Gentoo yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty easy to identify with that white top across the top of the head. And the two great penguins are, of course, king penguin and emperor penguin. So there we go. And it's all about, see that yellow crest that they have? It's all about how long that is, how big that is, actually, you know, how erect it is, and what angle it sits at, and that's how we separate some of the crested penguins from each other. About 1.2 million breeding pairs of southern rockhopper, and they do literally hop on rocks. They've got very strong claws. They live for about 11 to 12 years, something like that, and they're found on many of the sub-Antarctic islands. Falkland Islands being one of them, Heard Island, McDonnell Island, Kerguelen Island as well. And as I say, when they get on these small islands, they do start to separate slightly evolutionary, but in terms of a species, they all are as one. Does anybody know what a flock of birds is a flock? Does anybody know what a group of penguins is called? Oh, did somebody say waddle?
Waddle.
Yeah, lady in the back. It is a waddle. For those who didn't hear, a waddle of penguins, and I think we'd all agree after seeing them yesterday, that's a pretty appropriate name for. This is a waddle of southern rockhoppers. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to look at that yellow crest on the eye. These are part of the crested penguins. Now, compare and contrast to our next punk rocker friend. Look at that. That's a hairdo there. Okay, so this is a northern rockhopper. Again, it's one of those splits. It is actually now considered a separate species from southern rockhopper, but again, it is one of the crested penguins. It has that crest over the head. Quite a number of breeding pairs, 190 to 230,000. Again, live for a similar length of time, around about 12 years. All these penguins are around about this size do so. They're about 50 centimetres in length. And again, they found the Antarctica and the subantarctic islands. But that's quite a natty area there. Big declines in population, sadly, over the last 30 years, between about 60 to 90%. Habitat loss, human disturbance, and as ever, loss and removal of its food source, commercial fishing. Two particular countries seem to like to be down here and take as much krill as they can, and obviously that has a big impact on the ecosystem, very sadly. So that's our northern rockhopper. And the next is our macaroni penguin. Again, very bright yellow crest, quite thick in comparison to the other two. This is in fact the most abundant of all the penguins, and again, it's a member of the crested group. About 9 million breeding pairs, about 5 kilograms in weight, a little taller than the other two, about 70 centimeters in height, and again, they're found right across the Antarctic Peninsula and many of the sub-Antarctic islands. Macaroni penguin. Macaroni, the word is quite an interesting word. I think we're all familiar with macaroni. That'd be right?
And cheese.
Yeah. Macaroni cheese, yeah. And the name comes, well, in part we've got the tune Yankee Doodle Dandy. I think many of us will be familiar with that. But also, when these chaps, these are 18th century, or 17th century rather, British aristocrats. They were very, very wealthy, and they used to travel the world looking for the next sexiest thing, the next exciting thing, whatever that might be. Food and wine was always a big thing. They were very dandy, and they would always adorn their wigs with bows and feathers and similar things like that. And a group of these chaps headed off to Italy, would you believe, and they found this amazing food stuff, and they brought it back to the UK, and that amazing food stuff, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, was macaroni. So this group of very rich, very elite British aristocrats were named the Macaroni Boys, and when the sailors of the day got down to South America, Antarctica, and saw these guys with the fancy plumes in their head, they reminded them of the wealthy aristocrats that used to do similar, and that's where the name macaroni came from. Now, banded penguins, ladies and gentlemen, here we have our first. This is a Humboldt penguin. This is one of the banded group. As a group, you might also refer to them as jackass. If anybody's heard a braying donkey or a braying jack, did anybody hear them yesterday? No, nobody made a sound. They do sound very much like a braying donkey or a braying jackass. That is a generic term for them. This is a Humboldt penguin found on many, many rocky coasts around Chile and Peru. So if you've been on since LA, you almost will have seen them actually. And they build their nest. They also burrow. The banded penguins are also known as burrowing penguins, and in the case of Humboldt penguins, they actually burrow into their own guano, and that's where they make their nest and they lay their eggs within that burrow. And they did suffer a little bit of a decline because the Peruvians and Chileans used to like to mine that guano for their fertilizer for their crops. Very, very good as fertilizer, and it had a little bit of a devastating effect on the numbers for a period, but fortunately they've stopped mining the guano, and our Humboldt penguins has made quite a remarkable recovery. So we see Humboldt penguin, and we can see that white and black. Let me get my pointer. The white and black. We've got a white band there, followed by a black band. This is important, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, because the next one we're going to see will be our Magellanic, which is the one we saw yesterday, and we'll show you how we separate the two. Yeah, one of the burrowing penguins. Speaking of Magellanic, here he is. Ferdinand Magellan. Pretty much everything down here, whether it be a woodpecker, a snipe, an owl, or a penguin, are named after this great Portuguese explorer. Now we mentioned the single white and black of our Humboldt penguin. We no longer have a single white or black. We have white, black, white, black, white. That's how we tell Magellanic penguin from Humboldt penguin. I'll stick the two together in just a tick. You can see what they look like side by side. But again, you know, these are about 60 centimetres. They do live quite a long time actually. They live for about 20 years compared to the smaller rockhoppers. And there's about 1.5 million pairs of these breeding worldwide. Quite a wide geographical range: Uruguay, Falkland, Argentina, Chile, and even into Brazil on occasion. Here's one brain. Talked about jackass. Do you see that pink bit just by the eye, base of the bill? That's very, very important because, believe it or not, penguins get very hot and they have to cool down, and we'll come to why that little bit of flesh is very important in just a few moments' time. But they eat generally a lot of squid, a lot of crustacea. They don't forage that deep, maybe about 50 metres, 160 feet, and they are pretty common around these parts, particularly on Falkland. Now, here we are. This helps, doesn't it? So we can see white and black, white, black, white, black. Magellanic on the left, Humboldt on the right, and that's how we separate our two South American Antarctic banded penguin species. Moving on, brush-tailed. I mentioned brush-tails have those very stiff tail feathers that stick out the back. This is our Adelie penguin, quite a southern species. We're likely to have encountered this only on the Antarctic Peninsula. Actually, I know we did. I know some of the bird watchers on the top deck did see this. Around about 70 centimetres in length. Again, these guys live for about 20 years, and the name comes from Adelie Land. And Adelie Land was named by, I'll get this name right, Jules de Monts-D'Urville. And he was a French polar explorer, and he named Adelie Land after his wife, Adelie d'Urville. And the penguin was subsequently named after the land, named after the wife. There you go. So that's how this. So if you can see that very white eye, that's very distinctive of the species. No other species has this black head and this white eye in the way that this species does. Very distinctive indeed. Very difficult to confuse it with any other species. Here we go. Did a few of us see scenes like this? Yeah? We've all got our own photographs? Yes? If anyone's not sure, do come and find me down there or at the back. Happy to go through them. And here we have chinstrap penguin. And we know this is a chinstrap penguin. Can we all see for those at the back? There's a very black line, like a policeman's helmet, that chin strap that goes under the chin. That's where this bird gets its name, chinstrap. Very much an Antarctic species. You do get them on some of the sub-Antarctic islands, and again, like all these penguins, krill and squid being its main food source. One thing peculiar to chinstrap penguins, as my wife will tell you, they're very, very argumentative. They are very aggressive. They like to start an argument with their neighbour wherever possible, and they will quite happily steal stones. Penguins tend not to make nests of any particular form, depending on the species. Some penguins, such as, and we'll come to this later, some penguins like emperor and king, they have a little pouch, like a brood patch, and they sit the egg on their feet and they will brood it that way. Others will create a rudimentary scrape in the ground, and others, like chinstrap, will use small stones that they will happily steal from their neighbour's nest. Yeah, no problem doing that whatsoever. So about 500,000 breeding pairs again, pretty stable in terms of their population size. Pretty tall, actually, for one of the smaller penguins, 90 centimetres in height. Oh, and here we have, I've skipped a slide. Gen 2 penguin. Gen 2 penguin, ladies and gentlemen. We saw these yesterday. Again, pretty widespread across Antarctica. They have very, very orange feet, very, very orange base of the bill, and they have that white stripe that goes over the top of the head. Again, they live for about 12 to 15 years. Lots and lots of information about our friends, penguins. Here we go. It's a nice family photograph. They do lay 2 eggs. They generally have 2 chicks. Gen 2s, many penguins, in fact most penguins, particularly the larger ones, emperor and kings, will have 1 chick. Just the 1 chick. We can see that white stripe across the top of the head, and that pretty much distinguishes this species from any other. Did anybody go to Volunteer Point yesterday? Yeah, did you see scenes like this? Plenty of birds, not too much avian flu. No, that's good news. Yeah, avian flu, as I'm sure everybody's aware, ladies and gentlemen, does tend to go through colonies, whether that be penguin or gannet or terns, can have quite a devastating effect, but most colonies eventually seem to bounce back. But that's quite a sight. 150,000 more king penguins, St Andrews Bay Rookery, pretty sensational view. And here we have I saw 4 yesterday. Anybody seen more than 4? You must. 4, big number, yeah.
40.
As I say, not natural nest builders. They just pop their egg on the top of their feet. But they are great divers, actually. Lanternfish are one of their favourite food, and they will dive as much as 1,000 feet in order to capture their prey. I did show a slide of a lanternfish a couple of presentations ago, and they have what we call photophore cells down the lateral line, and these glow in order to produce light, and this is one of the king penguins and indeed the emperor penguins' favourite foods. They do, ladies and gentlemen, like an afternoon nap, would you believe? Very much like me. Once I've had a little bit of bite to eat, bit of afternoon tea, I do like to take to the cabin. But yeah, they do. It's something scientists have found over the years. And as I say, I mentioned that egg that they pop on the top of the feet and use what we call a brood patch. It's basically a bare piece of flesh. It doesn't have much feathering on it, and there's a lot of warm blood circulating through it, and that is what effectively incubates the egg and keeps that egg warm. So this is what the adults look like. We're now going to have a quick look at the youngsters and the teenagers. Yeah. So on the left, that's what it looks like as a youngster, and as it reaches teenage years and the hair gel starts to come out and the makeup, we get this bird on the right, and it sheds that brown downy feather, and we get into the very very dense feathering that in effect keeps all penguins alive. They are a set of very tightly net interlocking feathers that effectively acts like a dry suit. If anybody's familiar with diving, you can have a wetsuit which allows a bit of wet water in, or you can have a dry suit that keeps water completely out. These guys have a dry suit. Underneath the feathers, they have a thin layer of blubber just to keep them extra warm also. These are king penguin. One of the biggest, actually, up to about 1 metre in height, 90 centimetres, 16 kilograms in weight. There's about 2 million breeding pairs of these birds. So they're doing all right, they're doing quite well, and again, they don't breed on Antarctica itself. They breed on the sub-Antarctic islands, Falkland being one of them. I think we might have done some trips from Punta Arenas to some of the king penguin colonies, so they are in South America as well. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest are emperor penguin. Have we all seen that David Attenborough film, The March of the Penguins? Yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff. It's a bit brutal as well. They are the only animal on the planet that breeds through the Antarctic winter. Virtually all of the other animals will move to the edge of the ice pack, edge to the southern hemisphere ice pack, and survive in that manner, but emperor penguins will sit right in the interior of Antarctica, right through the Antarctic winter. They were probably first seen by Captain James Cook around 1773, and no doubt he would have been one of the first to spot the massive emperor penguin. They're about 1.2, 1.3 meters in height, pretty tall, and about 40 kilograms in weight. There's a lot of weight there in an emperor penguin. Emperor penguins many penguins, not just emperor penguins. Sadly, if you looked around Falkland in the 17th century, Falkland, South Georgia, there were no trees. So the whalers of the time, when they were rendering down the whale blubber in order to ship back to Europe, ship back to the UK and Norway, they would need to render down the whale blubber using fire, using heat, but there were no trees to burn. But what there were lots of penguins. Yeah, penguins are very rich in fat and they burn very, very easily, and very sadly, many penguins met a bit of a fiery death. And that's what they used to fuel the rendering down of the whale blubber. So there's emperor penguin. Lived for about 20 years, probably the longest living of all the penguin species we have. Of the 66 known emperor penguin colonies that we have, just around about half of them have been discovered from space, incredibly. So as the satellites have been circling the southern hemisphere, circling the South Pole, they've been sending back imagery of these very, very small black dots in the middle of a big white sheet, and scientists have discovered that they are in fact emperor penguin colonies. And as I say, of the 66 colonies we know of, half of them have been discovered in this manner from space. There is one final penguin actually. It is extinct sadly, but it was discovered via fossils, and it was considered to be around about 2 to 3 meters in height. Yeah, so that's a pretty big penguin indeed. But the largest as it stands is this bird, our emperor penguin, with its one chick, and that's another one that pops its egg on the top of its feet and uses that brood patch to incubate it. As always, ladies and gentlemen, Antarctic krill is the main target for pretty much anything down here, including our friend the penguin. But it isn't just krill. It is obviously squid as well as mentioned, the Antarctic lanternfish. We've seen the next slide before, but just to reiterate the point, they don't always have it their own way, the poor old penguin. They don't have many natural predators. Orca's one of them, and of course leopard seal is the other one. I'm going to make the same joke twice. Does anybody know what this species is called? Unlucky. Yeah, that's right. The same answer twice. Yeah, so there you go. That's a Gentoo penguin. Very, very sadly met its end. Now, let's talk about some penguin adaptations, some physiological adaptations that allow it to make its home down here in Antarctica. The first one, most birds fly. Consequently, their skeleton it has a honeycomb structure running through the bones, and this honeycomb structure makes this bird very, very, very light indeed. Lots of air running through its skeleton. When any of us have tried learning to swim and you're there with your armbands on, trying to dive under the water with armbands and a rubber ring is nigh on impossible because of the air. And that is exactly the same problem penguins found. They couldn't dive because the air with the honeycomb structure of flying birds, and over the years that honeycomb structure has been lost and lost and lost and lost, and now a penguin's skeleton is completely dense, no air pockets whatsoever. So we've basically gone from skeleton like this with all these air pockets, because flying birds need to be as light as possible, but diving birds need to be as dense as possible. You can't have air within the skeleton, so they've lost this to this. They've gone very, very dense indeed. The wings of flying birds have been very much modified into effectively flippers. They've fused into the keel, the breastbone, and it makes them very, very powerful swimmers indeed. Very, very strong legs as well, and with webbed feet that sit at the back of the bird. And for those who might not be aware, cats and dogs walk on their toes. So your cat and your dog walk on their toes. This is called digitigrade. Digitigrade. In other words, they walk on their digits. You, me, and penguins all walk on their soles of their feet, and that allows them to walk around some of these particularly rocky and steep cliffs with a greater of ease than you would be able to if you were on your digits. So this is called plantigrade. When you walk on the soles of your feet, it is known as plantigrade locomotion. And I'm sorry that you didn't have this information yesterday, because you could have actually looked out for it. And the next time you see a penguin, you'll be looking to see whether it's walking on its feet or its toes, I'm sure. But this is plantigrade locomotion. They also do something called thermoregulation. I mentioned that bit of pink skin around the base of the bill. They do get very, very hot. Obviously, they need to keep warm, but that skin around the face allows them to lose heat through that fleshy skin there. They pump all the blood through that part of the body in order to cool down. But of course, not only do they need to cool down, they also need to stay warm, and they will form huddles which will actually raise the temperature to an incredible 38 degrees centigrade. It's around about 98, 99 degrees Fahrenheit within the centre of those huddles. I'm sure we all know, we've seen them on the TV, they move around, and they all take time to spend time within the centre of that huddle. And when they start to get too hot, they move to the outer edge of the huddle. The ones that have been on the outer edge that are now cold, they move into the centre of the huddle. Incredible, they all know what they're doing. I always say this, in nature, nothing's by chance, nothing's by coincidence, everything is by design. These guys know exactly what to do in order to stay warm and indeed cool down. So I said the dense feathering gives them about 80 to 84% of the insulation that they need, and they do also have that layer of blubber underneath also. And there's the social thermoregulation that we just talked about via that huddling. They will also pant, very much like your dog. When your dog sits at home with its tongue hanging out to keep cool, panting, penguins will also do the same. And this is counter shading, ladies and gentlemen. This is really quite interesting. So we all know pretty much that virtually all penguins on the underside are white, and on the back they're black. That is what we call counter shading. It is in fact not just birds that have this. Fish, many fish have it. They'll be dark on the back and white underneath. That is because when you're looking down on something that's dark, on a dark seabed, it's much harder to see than if it was white. Conversely, when you're looking up into the bright sky and the animal is fairly white underneath, again, that makes that animal a little more difficult to see when you're looking against a bright sky and a bright white animal underneath. And that is called counter shading. And that, to a degree, allows it to evade predation from things like leopard seals and orca. It's kind of a camouflage. And back to our king penguins. Did anybody see any kind of scruffy looking ones yesterday? Yeah, or looking a bit tatty? These aren't juvenile birds. I showed you a picture of the juvenile and the teenager stretching out of its brown down. That is not what is happening here. This is called catastrophic molt. It sounds a bit dramatic, calling it catastrophic molt, but briefly, ladies and gentlemen, what this means, most birds need to fly. All birds need to renew their feathers, and they do so very sequentially in order over a period of time. Generally about 3 weeks, they will lose their body feathers, their tail, their head feathers, their primaries, then the secondaries, and some of their coverts. But they will never lose all of their feathers all at the same time. Why? Because they need to fly. They need to continue to fly. They can't not fly because they will be predated and they will be eaten. So they need to continue to fly. Penguins don't have that problem. So they think, why spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks molting our feathers here and a bit of feathers there, we'll do it here, we'll do that. Let's get it over and done with. And that's exactly what they do. They go out to sea, they build up their fat reserves, and then they come ashore and they literally molt all their feathers in one go. And then they regrow a whole new set of feathers. And that generally takes about 2 weeks, and they do it all in one bash. They don't eat during that period, and it's crucially important. I had mentioned it a few days ago that they do not get pushed into the sea or anywhere near the sea when they're going through this catastrophic molt. They do not have their dry suit insulation, and if they end up being forced into the sea by a photographer or an overzealous naturalist, they will die, they will freeze to death because they'll just get too cold. But that is catastrophic molt, ladies and gentlemen. It does happen every year, and they do fast for the period. They don't eat a single thing. So there's a few physiological adaptations that allow these incredible birds to survive and indeed thrive in some pretty hostile conditions. Now, just before we end, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to tell you a very brief story with regard to penguins, my goddaughter, and me. Who's ever heard of a film called Happy Feet? You all heard of that? Yeah. All about penguins. So, my goddaughter was about 10, and I was about 20, and I was put in charge of her. Incredibly, my sister decided that I should look after my goddaughter for the day. What to do with a 10-year-old little girl? Now, she suggested a film called Happy Feet, and I thought this was a perfect solution to a problem that I was looking at. Happy Feet went on. Now, I'm not sure she was expecting a 1.5 hour critique. This poor 10-year-old child. But she got it anyway. And I sat through and I pointed out everything that wasn't quite right with this film. And I'd explained to her exactly what catastrophic mold was. In exactly the same way I just described to you guys what catastrophic mold was. And she turns to me and she says, Uncle Alan, will they get cold? Will they need a jumper or a sweater? Well, I couldn't believe my ears, ladies and gentlemen. I was incredulous that this child hadn't listened to a word I said. Of course not. What a ridiculous, Ashley is her name, by the way. What a ridiculous question to ask. Have you not been listening to a word Uncle Alan has been telling you? Ladies and gentlemen, I had barely finished my sentence when the next scene came on. She's now 30 and she still doesn't believe a word I say about birds. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for your time. See you again.